Good morning. Today is Women's Equality Day, with 2020 marking 100 years since women gained the right to vote. Since 1971, we've commemorated the anniversary with the ratification of the 19th Amendment that occurred in August 18th. And we at WBC put the faces of 60 women out on August 18th. But today we stop and reflect what getting equality and parity means. Welcome to the Women Business Collaborative August CEO Call. What an outstanding, diverse, committed group of speakers. WBC is so proud to support Chief Executive Officer leaders, and never before in the history of this country do we focus more on senior diverse talent, board talent, support of our communities. And today is the epitome of excellence because it's represented by the CEOs of Kaiser Permanente, Prudential Financial, and the Lieutenant General from the U.S. Army, Nadja. Thanks to each of you for joining us and supporting us on social media. The message of calm and consistent CEO leadership in crisis time for this nation. We invite all of you to join us for our summit, October 1st and 2nd. We will soon announce our CEO award winners for that summit. WBC is an unprecedented alliance of 41 national professional women's organizations collaborating together for equal pay, position, and power. And we're proud to have 200 members of our board, advisory, and leaders council. It is my joy to turn this forum over to our WBC Forum co-host for CEOs. That's Robert Reiss, chair of the CEO Forum and WBC board member, and Becky Shambaugh, CEO Shambaugh Communications. So thank you everyone for joining us as we listen, as we learn and lead. Robert and Becky.
Thanks, and Becky's co-host. So I'm Robert Reiss, and to me 2020, it's really like wrapping 1918, 1929, and 1968 all into one. And while WBC's vision is equal pay, power, and position for all business and women, we see this importance of expanding into business, the economy, and society. So our goal for today is to hear from top leaders on how to succeed through times like these and in other times so you yourself can succeed and so you could share the message. My co-host, Becky Shambaugh, she's an internationally recognized leadership expert, author, keynote speaker, pioneer for all women's leadership. And we are going to be interviewing leaders in military, in healthcare, and in financial services. So what we're going to do is I'm going to give a snapshot of the three leaders we'll be interviewing, and then we'll do the interviews. So the first one is going to be in military, Lieutenant General Nadja West. And here's what I want to say. Nadja, I know really well, is one of the great leaders of our time, truly. And so I'm going to give, so she gets the credit. She has a lot of firsts, but I'll just say a few. The first Black Army Surgeon General, the first Black female Major General in Army Medicine, the first Black female Lieutenant General, and the highest ranking woman to have graduated from the United States Military Academy. She's managed over 130,000 people, and she was recently retired as the 44th U.S. Army Surgeon General. So welcome, Nadja. For healthcare, going to have Greg Adams, who's the chairman and CEO of Kaiser Permanente. And I want to say, being on hospital boards as well, there is no organization in healthcare, probably in the world and other areas as well, like Kaiser. They are the true leaders in the integrated healthcare model, which goes through the entire continuum. They've obviously been the top leader in diversity and inclusion in the country. But I mean, think about this: over 84 billion in revenue, over 300,000 employees, and plus they have 12.5 million members. So welcome, Greg. And for financial services, Caroline Feeney, she's CEO of Individual Solutions for Prudential Financial, and she is also the representative for the National Association for Female Executives. She's on the Executive Roundtable, and she is not just a great leader in her own right with a big heart and a brilliant mind, but she also did the technology transformation to change an industry, access, experience, customer expectations. So welcome all. So let's start off with Nadja. So Nadja, with your background, what is your vision for America, for a better society that is fully represented?
Well, that's, for me, the vision has been, I think, articulated all throughout history of, equality. It sounds like a utopian environment of everyone living together, everyone being treated with dignity and respect, everyone being valued as members of a team that can make our collective society better. That's my vision. And again, it sounds utopian, but there have been examples throughout history where people have strived for that. And so that's my vision: is everyone's treated with dignity and respect, equally valued, and are able to advance our society together.
So let's talk about the concept of leadership. You've been in every aspect, and you and I have spoken many times that in the military, there are things that business could learn from it as well. But first, share, what is your core belief in what makes a great leader? And then talk a little bit about how the Army teaches leadership.
Well, a great leader, the Army has a definition for everything, right? We've got manuals and, the official definition. And so, paraphrase, the Army describes leadership as the process of providing, purpose, direction, and motivation to get a particular mission job done. And it also implies what a leader must know, do, and be to lead their people, our people as leaders or soldiers or whatever service that you're in, to achieve that vision. And so the attributes of a leader, in my opinion, of course, you have to have character and integrity. And we have, Army values that are inculcated from day one on what the Army's values are. Leadership is loyalty, duty, respect, selfless service, honor, integrity, and personal courage. And if you take the first letter of each one of those, it kind of spells leadership. So these are values that we're told, and it's not just to list them, we have to live them and understand what they are. So I think the character and the values is the first part. And then the second part is, knowing and caring about your people and truly caring about them. It can't be fake, because sometimes people can understand if they are just a means to an end, right? They're just items in your armamentarium to get something done, and you don't recognize them as human beings and people that have hopes, dreams, are motivated in different ways. And so I think the values, the character, of course, competent in your skills. That you have to be competent in what what the type of organization you're leading. And then you have to really have that empathy, caring about your people that you lead.
Becky?
Well, Nadja, it's a pleasure to have you, and it's an honor to have you here with us today, and reading your background and getting to know you. I want to personally say on behalf of all of us, thank you for your service. Thank you for your commitment to support and serve this nation and all the people that are in this planet, really. So thank you so much. And in the spirit of leadership, we're in unprecedented times, and unprecedented times calls for leadership, great leadership, and unprecedented leadership in some ways. Given that this is Women's Equality Day, perfect timing, what advice do you have for women, given your journey? And I'm sure you've had great accomplishments, which you have, but you've had a journey of challenges and ups and downs, right? But what lesson have you learned? What advice do you have for women to lead during these unprecedented times, to really step into their leadership and to navigate opportunities and challenges? And maybe it's experiences that you've had, you could pass along to us.
Yeah, that's really important, I think, of all leaders, but from a perspective of being a woman leader in different environments, the first thing is just to be authentic and be yourself. A lot of times, and especially in an environment with the military, sometimes there's a thought that maybe you should change your persona to fit in with the type of organization that you're in. So when I first joined the military, when I first went to West Point, very few women. In my class, we started with 126 and graduated 62 out of a class that was about 1,300 and about 900 graduated. So we weren't a whole, there wasn't a big number of us. And there were a few women in the class of 80 and 81 before me. And so there, again, I was only 17, so I'm not as, advanced in my thinking as I am now. But, when you're a teenager, you want to fit in. And so you want to, you can start, trying to be like those around you. But sometimes you lose yourself and you lose the attributes that make you a unique leader and that you can lead in your own right. So I would say be authentic, be yourself. And the second thing I would say is don't take yourself out of the race before you even start running. What I've seen a lot of times, I saw it in myself that, there's a lack of self-confidence initially, or there's a lack of belief that, hey, why me? I'm sure there's so many other people that could do this much better than me. So there's a sense early on maybe that there are others out there that can do it, which is true. Others can do it, but so can you. And I think that's one where we sometimes as women, and again, we're not a homogeneous group, they're, bell-shaped curve. But in general, sometimes women tend to say, I'm not going to go for it unless I'm like 110% ready and sure that I can do this. Whereas that's not a bad thing, but then you hesitate and you don't get into the game before you feel you're 100% ready, where others might say, and some of my male counterparts used to say this to me, it's like, look, just go out there and do the best you can. You're ready. You've got the skills, the training. So don't sell yourself short. Go for it. Of course, if you're prepared, properly prepared in the area, you don't want to go in somewhere unprepared. But once you get that level of preparation, you need to really go for it. So those are the things that I would start with.
It's very interesting because I think it's the narrative or the chatter in our head, right? That is self-limiting. So it's believing in ourselves. And I think sometimes we sell ourselves short and don't realize the power and influence that we do have, which is important. So thank you for that. Thank you so much for that. Robert?
So Nadja, let's talk about your upbringing. And you've shared things with me that really changed the way of thinking. And from what you've learned from your parents, what you learned growing up Catholic, just talk about what you've learned and how that relates to the society we're in and the challenges we're in today.
Well, thanks, Robert. And since you asked, again, I always preface that I'm not here to proselytize or tell folks, but I'm just telling you what my experience was. And so I was one of 12 adopted children. And so when I say that two things saved my life, the Army, literally, and the Catholic Church, literally, because again, I was an orphan with an uncertain future. And if I was not adopted by a family, that my dad was in the Army and was stationed where I was, so the Army put him there, and I believe it was divine providence, and so the Army, gave me my start in the Catholic religion because my mom couldn't have kids of her own, and some nuns that she befriended recommended rather than feel sorry for yourself, there's a whole lot of kids that could use your help. And so I was the fortunate recipient of that really generous heart of my parents, very humble African-American, family that ended up with 12 children of their own and then helping find, homes for 300 others. They didn't run an agency. They weren't paid for it. It was just something that they really wanted to make a difference. And so growing up in that environment with, loving family who were, patriotic, serve your country, and very, spiritual and doing the right thing, definitely influenced and made me who I was today. And as far as Catholicism, my parents used to, kind of challenge me. We had you know, one of those Bibles that has everything in the New Testament where Jesus spoke, highlighted in red text. And so they said, hey, if you can find anything in there that is, you know, contrary to how you should live, or a way that you can fashion your life, then show me. And I was hard pressed to find anything of, you know, loving your neighbor, reaching out to those that are less fortunate than yourself, and people who are not like yourself, because he spent a lot of time with people that he was not supposed to talk to. Women back in the day, you know, where he was, you know, living 2,000 years ago, you weren't supposed to talk to women, especially women of certain types. You know, the Samaritan woman at the well is one of my most, you know, favorite passages as an example. And so he was very progressive. He was very inclusive. And that's, you know, kind of how I grew up with my parents, you know, helping others, not judging others when you can. And again, so in my opinion, that's a divine person. Do I reach that every day? Absolutely not, but I'm trying. And so it's a good example to try for and strive for, in my opinion.
Let's now talk about another person who has truly inspired you, which is Martin Luther King. And you know, when you talk about character on the one hand and nonviolence on the other hand, and combining them, and then I will say, you have to, after you talk about this, share that link about the Birmingham jail. It is mind blowing. When you shared it with me, it's like an hour, but that letter could be among the most important letters in the history of America. Talk about it.
Absolutely. And, you know, everyone knows, you know, Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech, and can, you know, quote the, you know, let's not judge people by the content of, you know, the color of their skin, but the content of their character. That's kind of a famous one. But to me, his genius is in the contents of the letter from Birmingham City Jail in 1963. And if you know the history behind that, I mean, he wrote it while he was in jail, literally, and wrote it on scraps of paper that his team would bring in. And so when you read the prose of this, just the intellect that comes through, the calmness, we talk about calm leadership. The letter was in response to some clergy members of the South who were kind of ridiculing him, saying, hey, why are you breaking the law? Why are you doing these things? You know, the time is coming, wait. And he really answers this question. And he quotes, you know, St. Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, you know, Niebuhr, all of these different philosophers on just law, on, you know, ways of doing things. If you didn't realize the date of it, it would be, you know, something that could be from today. And, you know, one of the things, and he talks about the tension that is developed during times when you're trying to, you know, make change, or the tensions of things that occur when you're trying to uncover things that just aren't right. And one of the lines that really resonates with me, because as a healthcare professional and as a dermatologist, on top of that, he talks about something. He mentions that, you know, when he talks about the injustices, he said it's like a boil that can never be cured so long as it's covered up, but it must be open with all its ugliness to the natural medicines of air and light. So just like a boil, injustices must be exposed with all the tensions that its exposure creates, to the light of human conscience and the air of national opinion before it can be cured. How awesome is that? And to say something like that with no references, he didn't have library books and things that he had in the jail. But, you know, and as a dermatologist, I know that if you just lance a boil and don't, you know, drain out the purulent material that's in there, not to get gross or anything, it'll come back, right? You have to open the thing, drain all that out, and even, you can't even just cover it over. You have to make sure the cavity is cleaned out, because it'll just come back. And so, again, not to get gross, but that's, you know, human nature knows that. You can't take an abscess and just put it, you know, that's festering. You've got to treat it. Otherwise, it'll kill the whole organism if it ruptures. And so that's to me, a great commentary on our society. If we don't really address some of these things, it will just continue to recrudesce. Over and over, you're going to see these outbreaks of people who are just saying, yikes, we have to do something. And so he's in my opinion, you know, of course we have a celebration of him, but I think his intellect and his just, is just underrated, in my opinion. But that letter, and then when put to, so I've read it over the years multiple times, but when it was the Kirwan Institute from Ohio State University that actually put the letter to images from the 60s during his time to provide context. And it was, each piece was read by a different member of the Ohio community leaders. And even the football coach from that at the time. It was done in 2015. It just really brings it home, and it's a phenomenal message that I think, if it's too dry of a read to read on your own, if you watch it again, it's amazing. I'm sorry I went on a little bit longer than I.
Nadja, that was tremendous, and I want to say it's amazing. Every time I speak with you, I learn something new and get more inspired. Now I'm inspired by boils. But really, here's what I do want to say. Let's make sure, Edie, as a note, we email everyone the link, and I could get it to you, or Nadja can get it to you for that incredible video. It is truly inspiring to watch. So I want to thank you very much, Nadja. And now we're going to move on. And Becky, you are going to interview the leader in healthcare.
Wow, Greg, how about coming after that one, huh?
Oh, I think she should continue.
I think, oh, no, you're not going to get off the hook here. Nadja, thank you so much. I tell you, it's just so inspiring, the leadership dialogue that you have. So keep on, okay? Greg, wonderful to have you here. Thank you for getting up early on the West Coast to join us today, although I'm sure you've had a meeting before this. I do want to build upon this leadership thing and culture. And Kaiser has always been noted for and awarded for their culture, a culture of caring, a culture of well-being. In fact, you've even pushed that out of the community. Thank you for your leadership and helping to inspire that, but also to make that happen in your extraordinary commitment. In the spirit of leadership, tell us about your leadership and how you cultivate that and keep that culture going. And even in these unprecedented times, what is important right now, and what have you noticed about your leadership, right? That's helping to maintain the crown jewel of the inclusion, the caring of people, and really just getting through these unprecedented times. What's important right now for you and your leadership?
One, Nadja, that was really inspirational. And it took me back in so many ways to kind of why Kaiser Permanente is so special, which really starts in many ways with the founding of the organization. Henry J. Kaiser, a physician by the name of Sidney Garfield, who really had a different way of providing healthcare and believed in the health of the individual, but also in the health of the community. And as we talk about equity and equality, I mean, there are stories all the way back to 1944 and 45 of Henry Kaiser and Sidney Garfield supporting employees through June 10th and having parades and raising money and encouraging African Americans to vote. So the people who are the people of Kaiser Permanente are here because they absolutely believe in the mission of this organization. And so first, it goes back to being authentic. To be a leader here in this organization, one has to be authentic. One has to really believe in the mission and to lead really from a place of owning that mission and from a place of humility. When I stepped into this role, I was only in the role for a few months before the pandemic. And so I was formulating a vision, had a sense of where we needed to go as an organization, and suddenly the pandemic hit. And so I had to step back and create space and to really alter my strategy and my leadership for what was needed at that moment. So this leader as being flexible and able to really connect to the moment and to the people is so important. And so for me, that was really in many ways about kind of stepping into the crisis management role that a leader has. And there were times, if you'll remember, when we didn't have PPE, we really didn't know how the virus was being spread. And I remember being on the phone, at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, calling suppliers, trying to locate and find PPE for our employees, for the people on the front line. And that was really important for me to do because that was what was needed at that time. I needed a CEO to reach out and say, we need testing equipment. We need PPE equipment. I have people on the front line that could be at risk. I think the other thing that I would say, and Nadja, I think, spoke to this, is, you know, the importance of communicating. And so, you know, large organization, many medical centers, people on the front line. So I felt it was important to, and especially in the beginning, to be on the front line, to go to the medical centers, to talk to our nurses, to talk to our physicians. Couldn't get to all of them, but we shared that throughout the organization. And then, you know, in an organization, certainly one as large as our organization, and going through that kind of a crisis, we tried very hard to be consistent and to standardize and to lead across the organization, but there's variation. And so our employees and staff saw that variation and it troubled them. So I actually, for a period of time, worked with one of our unions and engaged pretty regularly every other week with frontline staff. They were able to share with me their fears, their concerns, and where we were being inconsistent. I was able to go back to our leaders and to share that and to communicate it. And it created this way for our employees to really see and understand that as a leader, I was there and in the midst of this for them. The other thing that I think we already talked about was empathy. I think, especially in healthcare, but I think really in any forum, you know, being able to really understand and to, some of that came from dialogue, but to begin to address for our employees a lot of what you heard about their fear of going home, their concern about where they lived and passing the virus, the potential of a contact on to their children. So we stepped in, we created housing during the first surge. We addressed the fact that many of our frontline employees were concerned that if they were had contact, remember early on we weren't able to test, so we created a 80-day kind of leave period. So if they needed to be kind of out of the organization and away from their family for 80 days until they were able to confirm whether or not 80 hours, I'm sorry, not 80 days, 80 hours, so that we were able to confirm whether or not they had contacted the virus. We made that available to them. We, during the crisis and even continuing, we made childcare support available for them. So, you know, I've always believed that as a leader, if I look behind and no one's following, I'm in trouble. So for me, it is really important to be constantly understanding where our people are, articulating and knowing that they understand the vision, they understand where we're going, and that they're on board with the direction the organization is taking.
Thank you. Thank you for that. You know, I've heard three things. Is the authenticity, which is a theme that Nadja mentioned, the communications and the people first, the empathy, right? And being very prescriptive around that, not just talking about it, right? But the intentionality around that. The other question I'd like to ask, and that's really, I applaud you for your internal efforts and commitment and intention around, you know, people first, you know, the communications and really creating a culture where people are taken care of, right? How about on the external side? What are you excited about now that Kaiser is doing or is going to be doing around the social equity, right? Having that greater social impact, because I know that's also important to you, Greg, and part of the vision for Kaiser and the work that they do.
Sure. You know, I want to share that since this is Women's Equality Day, that I was listening to Nadja. You know, I started as a nurse. I started as a nurse. Actually, I was 15 when I went to nursing school. So all of my early leaders and mentors were women. Even as I moved into leadership, being in nursing leadership, I had amazing women leaders. And what I think there is, as I listen to Nadja, there are comparisons to women and frankly, people of color and the self-talk and some of the things that were addressed. I think those come out of our experiences. But I think, frankly, we all have them. And so, you know, the being able to step into the moment, being able to have confidence in oneself, and of course, having the skills and the qualities to lead are hugely important. But I think we all face those challenges of confidence. you know, I mentioned that we have this rich history, and you mentioned of diversity. I mean, for so many years, I mean, we started several years ago, our supplier diversity program, where we committed to spending over $1 billion in diverse firms. I think this year our target is 1.7 billion. We're right at 1.2. We were an early leader in understanding healthcare disparities and really integrating that into our organization. We announced recently, as coming off of the pandemic, or being, as we're dealing with the pandemic, and as we're dealing with the social and civil unrest, work that we were going to be doing externally. We committed in partnership with the local initiative corporation, $60 million really to kind of work with and help small and medium-sized Black and brown businesses to really recover and stabilize during this period of time. We're spending 30 million. The local initiative corporation is spending 30 million. But more than that, we're also focused on kind of how do we help some of these small businesses really develop the skills and the capacity to be successful and to deal with the challenges of these economic times. So we're spending another 50 million that we've targeted some 2,000 organizations that we will be working with to support and to help them be successful, predominantly Black, brown businesses, but others also. And then, you know, one of the things that we are passionate about as a healthcare organization is the fact that so much of what our people of color experience is really the result of trauma. And you've heard a lot about that now in terms of intergenerational trauma, the implications of systemic racism on trauma. And there's a lot out there about what we can do and how we can begin to dismantle and deal with some of those discriminating practices that exist in our institutions. So we're actually putting forth $25 million to really work with community-based organizations that are really engaged in this work or want to be engaged in this work, and supporting them in developing the skills and developing the plans to work with other organizations so that we're able to help organizations and individuals understand systemic racism, the implications in terms of trauma and health, and to begin to dismantle some of the structures and the issues that are out there. Then I just want to say real quickly, but as we communicated that, and as we announced that, and we did it at a wonderful park in Oakland that has, you know, larger than life figures of so many of our freedom challengers. We also communicated that as amazing as we are, and we've got a diverse board, we've got diverse leadership, but during this period, I was hearing from so many of our people, Black, brown, Asian, Latinx, that there were issues in our organization. So we're also looking at what do we need to do to understand what exists in our organization, even with our rich history, and how do we begin to address opportunities that exist in the organization. So we've started a listening session, and we are meeting with our business resource groups all over the organization. And we're looking at our data and owning the fact that as leaders, we have to really understand not just how we feel, but we have to really look at the data and say, from a data perspective, are Black and brown and other people really being elevated in the organization? Or are they having the opportunities that they need? And so there's internal work that says if we're going to lead external, we want to make sure that we've got a very strong foundation.
Thank you for that, Greg. It's just extraordinary commitment. I think we have time for one more quick question from Robert to Greg. Robert?
Yeah, I have, and I'm gonna make it tough because I want to throw two sort of pieces in here, Greg. So the key thing I want to ask about is alignment. So in every way, you know, if you have like 60,000 nurses and 20-odd thousand physicians, how do you get them aligned? How do you create, you're the one aligned organization, and we know in America, what we need more than anything is alignment. So the real question I want to ask is about how we create more alignment through corporations, through healthcare, through America. But then I need to throw in one little thing. Being that probably everyone on the phone has the same goal, which is not to get COVID, not to get people, for anyone to, how do we solve this? you're at the center of all these medical talks. So alignment is the main question, but if you have any advice for us in terms of COVID and how we deal with it.
Sure. Alignment. You know, it's an interesting question because we're in the process of going through our strategic plan, or developing our strategic plan as we sit here. And alignment is, it is a part of our DNA. Remember I said we started with Henry J. Kaiser and Sidney Garfield. They had two roles. One was medical care. The other was really the health plan, or physician care, medical care. The other was health plan. And it really required them coming together, having the shared vision, and then working together to create the plan. I think conversations, listening, valuing different perspectives, and bringing that into a place where we are able to really create a joint vision, and adopting joint truths, and then beginning to really own that together, and kind of co-creating and having others participate in the vision, creating the vision, participate in creating the plan, and being willing to continue to have respectful, courageous conversations. I often say that the conversation and the dialogue and the creation has to be about the issues and not about the individual, or not about attacking the institution, but elevating kind of our vision, our conversations, our goals beyond people, to really kind of, how do we have shared values? How do we have a shared understanding? And alignment requires work. Alignment requires staying in the conversation. Alignment requires staying committed to the vision. And it requires that we are able to respect our differences, respect differences of opinion, respect different backgrounds, but owning at a level kind of this common purpose, this common vision, this common plan. I mean, I think it allows us to kind of constantly go back to, we're aligned because of vision, because of our having co-created and are now owning the plan. So it is work. It can be done. For 75 years, this organization has operated committed to alignment, and it is something that it's just in the DNA of the organization. I do want, going to quickly to COVID, I think it's all out there. I mean, I think it's about us kind of accepting and owning it. I mean, what we know has evolved. We're very clear about what we must do in terms of isolation, or in terms of mask, in terms of social distancing. It's all there. What I would say is that in addition to all of that being there, as we begin to look at how do we reopen, the issue of our having the infrastructure and the resources to really do the testing, do the surveillance, do the contact tracing is just paramount, because we have to be able to know who's positive, know who's negative. We have to be able to self-quarantine or to isolate. We have to own the challenges that exist in our societies for certain groups who don't have the ability to make those decisions that, I'm going to quarantine, isolate, that are focused on, I need to be at work, or I can't feed my family, or my family won't eat. I mean, we as a society and as healthcare systems and as organizations must own all of that as we think through our next steps and how we get through this.
Thank you, Greg. Wow, that's just so helpful, and just gives us all pause and thought about how we navigate during these times, and leadership matters. So thank you so much for your leadership and again, intentionality toward all of this. Caroline, welcome. Nice to have you here. Thank you so much. And
Thank you.
You have certainly been a leader, a visionary, and a role model for leadership for gender equity, certainly within Prudential, and then outside in the community. So thank you for that and your commitment. As I think big theme here today, as you can see, is around leadership. And I would really be curious to hear from you during these times, and you can mirror your leadership today, what do you see as some of the important leadership qualities? And what do you see that leaders, executives who are women, what do they bring to this time of crisis, of times of disruption and renewal?
Yeah, thanks, Becky. So the first thing that I'd say during this times is when we had 50,000 employees across the globe within Prudential start working remotely. I have to say I was somewhat skeptical at first in terms of how this would unfold, but I actually am amazed with how successful it's been. And I think a couple of things. One, I've seen leaders across Prudential really lean in. And understand that we are in unprecedented times. Greg spoke about communication. So one of the things that I've taken away in terms of something that's very important for me to be thinking about as a leader is communicating often in many different ways, just like we are all communicating now differently than we normally would with a panel in front of a live audience. So WebEx, reaching through the organization to associates and recognizing them for their resilience and for everything that they're doing to walk customers and hold their hands through these times that are causing many customers great angst in terms of their overall financial picture. So I think it's leaning in. I think you mentioned what's unique in terms of women and their style and leadership. There's an enormous amount of research that shows women have a tendency to exhibit a lot of empathy in their leadership style. And I think during trying times and challenging times like we find ourselves in today, that really enables women to be incredibly powerful as leaders, because you're able to put yourself in other people's shoes in a very real way and understand that everybody's going to experience this differently. I mean, I've spoken to associates that are pleased with working remotely and they're thriving in this environment, but there's so many more that are finding this very challenging, whether they're single parents and have young kids and are trying to work, and at the same time they find themselves homeschooling kids, whether you're a caregiver at home, right? Everybody has their own unique situations, or whether you've had a spouse or partner that's lost their job and you have your own financial challenges. So I think being able to really understand that everybody is experiencing this differently and using empathy and the listening skills. One of the things I found myself doing when I reach out to my team now is taking the first part of that conversation to just check in. How are you doing? How are you? How's the family? And I think it's been very interesting. I think it's been healthy, and I hope we don't lose it going forward, is the way I find leadership has become more informal and more personal. You've got this blend of kids walking through the WebEx or losing power, everybody in different situations because maybe they're visiting a parent in a different location. But I think what it's done is it's blended the more formal work environment and actually made leaders a little bit more real, more approachable. And I hope that's the part of it, Becky, that we don't lose when some of these challenges are behind us.
Yeah. I keep hearing this theme of, a narrative of these times and what it's done for all of us. And it's really been an equalizer. All of a sudden you're looking at your manager or CEO in a Zoom call, right? And, their kids are in the background jumping on your lap or whatever. It's real. We're all human, right? And I think that creates a level of comfort or connection that we're all in this together, right? We're all human beings and trying to strive for that true north. So Prudential has really led the way in many ways around diversity and inclusion, particularly in the industry, and the indexes have showed their great strides and being published for that. Tell us, maybe one or two things you think that have really made a difference for Prudential. And I'm sure you've had your lens on that. And now through these unprecedented times, how has Prudential benefited from this, from having a more diverse and inclusive culture? And hence, how have those that you serve on the outside, your clients, benefited from this?
Yes, so a couple of thoughts. I'll speak internally in terms of just our culture first within Prudential. Obviously, it's well beyond the pandemic. It's all the issues that we've been facing and struggling with in terms of racial inequality. And after the death of George Floyd and too many other Black Americans, Prudential leaned in a very deliberate way. Becky, we had dozens of listening tours across the entire company, and And I participated in many of those. And this was really an opportunity for us to have very candid, very honest dialogues about what our Black associates were experiencing and sharing many of their very personal experiences that have shaped who they are and have impacted their lives. But we also had all of our other associates participating in these listening sessions. And so many of them were asking questions, trying to even seek to understand more. And I think so there was even more of a coming together in our culture. But we went into these, frankly, knowing that if it was just about listening and dialogue, that we would have failed, because we want to be part of why is this different this time. So we went into it knowing that we would take very meaningful, bold actions as a company. We would share those with all of our associates, which we have done. And those are the things that we believe are those bold actions that will actually make a difference, that will move the needle. Too many to go through right now, but
Right.
very real procedural changes around hiring practices and promotion opportunities and how we're looking at our data. And so that's on the internal side. But I also think we had already been very much immersed in trying to help consumers have access to financial education, financial tools and resources to help people understand how to get out of debt, do basic budgets, all the way through their own financial journey to financial wellness. And these times, unfortunately, have manifested what was already a gap in terms of financial preparedness, financial security for communities of color, specifically Black community. And now those communities are even more negatively impacted because of the pandemic. So what we have done is we have actually enhanced our strategy around a Black consumer strategy, combining all of the capabilities that Prudential has with very local targeted efforts in specific communities. And so that's where we can take all of our financial professionals that can meet people face to face, but also some of what we've been able to do to broaden our advice continuum so that we're able to meet people in broader markets and broader access, whether that's the mass markets through more of our digital and direct-to-consumer abilities. But I think the most important thing is understanding that we have broad reach. We can meet people where they are and how they want to be met and where they are in that journey. So that's a little bit about what Prudential's been doing at this time.
Thank you for that. I think we have another couple questions, maybe time for. I want to make sure we get these in, Caroline. But thank you for that. Some great examples, Robert.
Yes. So Caroline, what I want to ask you, I mean, we've spoken about this before, but financial services has historically been male dominated. So I want to talk about your vision, how it ties into internally in the industry, people working there, but also externally, because there's a huge, probably unprecedented transfer of wealth that will be mostly managed by women. So talk about what your vision for financial services is.
Yes, so thank you, Robert. So very similar to Nadja. I can only imagine in the military, financial services as an industry has been, as you say, historically male dominated, and unfortunately still is. There was a time when I was in a role many years ago where we had 1,200 sales leaders in a particular position, and I was one of 2 women in that role. And then that one woman left, and I think that leaves an impression with you. It leaves an impression on how you want an industry to look going forward. And certainly we don't look the same way today, but as an industry still have a lot of work to do. One of the main things that we've been focusing on is trying to make sure we bring more diverse talent into our financial advisor ranks. That's so important because those are the individuals that are going to be facing off with individuals in different communities. And then also making sure that we have individuals in leadership roles, so they're serving as role models in this industry. One of the things that I think is so important, Robert, in terms of at least my vision and what I think is going to make a difference, is making sure that women across this industry are taking the time to be able to coach mentor, advocate for women, and pay it forward. I was fortunate enough to be mentored and have great male advocates through my career. But now in the position that I'm in today, I do feel that it's time for me to pay it forward. And I would say that I'm optimistic that I see more and more women today doing exactly that. But it's not just about women, because most of those senior positions in the financial services industry and many industries are held by men today. So it's not an expectation that women do it alone. And I'm also optimistic that I do see more men reaching in and really trying to understand some of the unique challenges that women face. We've spoken about a couple of them already, that the confidence, the very real confidence gap that exists. And I do know that, at least for Prudential, our top leading financial professional for years on the financial planning side was a woman. And I think, again, some of the traits that I spoke about earlier in terms of listening and coaching and trying to understand people's situations and circumstances and what's most important to them and what's keeping them up at night lends itself to more women being successful in this career as advisors and leadership roles.
Well, with that, I have one more question, and I appreciate the optimism that you have, because the media, the channels of the newsfeed we get is where women are not, right? But I think there is a path that we're seeing that's moving forward, thanks to all of us on this call today. So I appreciate your optimism. But if we could put a real specific lens on this last question, what do you see, Caroline, is the number one thing that needs to happen to move the needle, right? Is it more women take the lead, building more confidence? Is it organization? Is it, what do you see as something that'll, there's a lot of things we can do, but what do you see as one of the biggest things that'll help move the needle?
Yeah, so certainly all of those things are things that are important to be able to move the needle. I do think there's a reality that it is going to be very important that there is a true awareness and appreciation that women succeeding in their careers and advancing in their careers is not a zero-sum game. By that I mean, as for each woman that is able to advance in her career, it doesn't mean that it's a takeaway for a male colleague or counterpart. And I think that's really important, because too many times you'll hear some undertone about, well, if that person's moving ahead, that's one less opportunity. I don't think that's the case at all. It doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. And I think that awareness is going to be important, that everybody can win, that companies grow stronger when they have more women among the ranks, and certainly more women in senior positions among their ranks. There's so much data that proves that they're more, those companies perform better across every performance measure when that's the case. And I also think, just candidly from a society perspective, making sure that we have gender parity and treating women with the equal opportunities ahead of them in their careers.
Thank you. You know, we're all better together, right?
Yes.
Thank you. Robert.
Okay, for the sum up, and my internet was unstable, so I want to go quickly. But I really want to thank everyone for listening in, because that is so true. We're all in this together. That's how we succeed. And I want to be respectful of your time, so we will end before it's 12 o'clock, and Greg, before it's like 9 a.m. for you to start the day. So what I do want to say is, number one, I will be writing a Forbes article on September 15th. And so any quotes that anyone gets, please share. And you could go to Lorena, you could go to the WBC website. But here are 3 quotes that I want to leave you with. And I do want to say, before I say this, that number one, we do have our big summit coming up for WBC October 1st and 2nd, and we will be having another CEO forum meeting like this roundtable on November 18th. So keep that in your calendars as a potential. So one, I'll start with Caroline. One thing I really got from you is that leaders have to realize that everyone is experiencing this differently. And that's a profound thought to consider and to be open to. And Greg what you said, which is so interesting. Here you take over Kaiser Permanente after all these years. And, you know, I've interviewed George Halverson and Bernard, and it's an amazing company. But here you get to deal with the first pandemic. Hallelujah, right? And then with systemic racism, which actually has been here forever, right? But so what you said that really resonated, we should all think about, is a leader must be flexible and connect to the moment. And that moment is always changing. And I'm thinking as all leaders, that's an amazing thought, that you have to really connect to any specific moment and always be aware of that. And then Nadja, you know, you and I have spoken a lot of times. And as I said, I always learn something new from you every single time. And I think what a cool concept to not take yourself out of the race before you started running. Let's imagine if all of us could do that in everything we do. Let's imagine if America, let's imagine if the world could not take us out of the race before we start running. Because at the end of the day, we will get through this pandemic at some point, but why can't we have, what my vision has always been is, why can't we solve everything at the same time? While we're solving the pandemic, build a better, more equitable society. We have the potential to do this. So the key, what I would say now, it's thought, it's communication, but it's action. And on that note, thank you very much, everyone.
Yes, and Robert, we want to thank you and Becky, and we thank everybody that has been making comments in the chats. And again, to Nadja West, for what you've done on your personal story and your qualities of leadership, your Martin Luther King and the story of the jail. We won't forget what you've said about leadership. To Kaiser, as Robert and Becky said, no company has probably done more on diversity, but the commitments, not only of your own culture, but $1.7 billion to minority suppliers, and your commitment to courageous conversations, and to certainly the alignment, which you say requires so much work. And clearly to Caroline Feeney and Prudential Financial, as you talk about leaders leaning in and the kind of empathy in trying times, what you did for diversity listening tours across the entire company, and what you did to really focus in on your Black consumers as well, and bringing financial services and men as advocates. We have learned so much today from all of your leadership, and we are richer because you are teaching us about leadership. We thank you all.